Dear friends, the short video we are about to share with you speaks for itself. However, the story behind it, in my opinion, is as inspiring and encouraging as the video itself. Our Music and Society seminar enrolls 10 Arab and 10 Jewish students from Nazareth, Tel Aviv, and their surroundings. As the recent vicious cycle of violence began, we were very moved by how concerned they were for each other's safety and well-being. Very quickly, this concern turned to a strong need to act and sound a counter voice that calls for mutual respect and coexistence. Together, they decided to produce a short video that would express their values on social media platforms. A Zoom session was set, and collectively they decided on the song they wanted to play. One of the students volunteered to do the arrangement, and they agreed on the message that goes with the music. Whenever there were more than one suggestion, they discussed it and made a final decision by voting. Once a decision was made, they all stood behind it and implemented it together to the highest standard. We are so proud of our students' values, maturity, and commitment to take a stand and make their voice heard. They give us hope in these dark times and faith in a better future.
Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, and I'd like to welcome you all to the second symposium on Israel-Palestine peace. We are pleased to be with you today, and we're pleased to bring this great group of witnesses that we believe peace is possible and is, in fact, the only way. You're going to hear testimony today from many people who are from various sides of this issue, different sides of the ocean, different sides of the Israel-Palestine debate, but we're all coming together with a common message and a common theme. We believe that peace is possible, and it is, in fact, the only way. Peace is possible, and it is, in fact, the only way for two brothers born of the same father to live together in the same small house. Peace is possible, and it is, in fact, the only way for two peoples to survive on the same small land. Peace is possible, and it is, in fact, the only way for two nations to exist in the same small space and survive. For two different countries that live side by side, that have been taught a lie that this war has been eternal, that this war has biblical implications, that this war must constantly exist. This is a lie. And we know that peace is possible, and it is, in fact, the only way. Whether they be Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, Yemeni, no matter who they are, peace in this region is not only possible, but it's necessary for everyone to be able to thrive. In fact, if we're to have peace in the larger world, in this region as well. In fact, I call this a small land, a small house, a small space in which two people survive. But this small space is more than adequate if we have, once and for all, a just peace. We believe that we can have that just peace. We believe that if the United States government gets behind getting the people to the table, we believe that if the people of these nations, the United States and the rest of the world, stand up and say, we demand peace, that peace is possible. Yeah, that's why this group has come together, because we're tired of waiting. We're tired of waiting for that hero to come that's going to finally fix the solution. We're tired of waiting for someone else to fix what we see is broken. We realize that the only way that peace is going to come is if we, the people, stand up and say, we demand peace. So why don't I turn it over to my brother, Moshe Chertoff, and he can give you some idea of why, as an Israeli citizen, he believes that peace is possible, and it is, in fact, the only way. Moshe.
Thank you, Rodney. Hi, everybody. I'm Moshe Chertoff, and I believe that peace is possible, and it's the only way. So good morning, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you are around the world. I hope that you are all as inspired as I was from the Polysymphony Youth Orchestra. We thank them for their efforts and are all blessed with their music and spirit. I wish them continued success. I also thank the Reverend Rodney Sadler for his wonderful intercommunal work and being a part of the organizing committee of this Peace Symposium series. Rodney always has inspirational things to say to keep us on track in a peaceful and loving manner. There is a spiritual element in making peace, no matter what your religion or basic belief is. An associate professor of Bible at the Union Presbyterian Seminary, he has again succeeded in arranging their services for the production of this broadcast. And we are so grateful for their team's effort in helping us get across the belief that peace is possible and it's the only way. Special thanks to Sam Ziegler and Aaron Mills and their teams for their technical support. So, welcome to all our viewers around the world of this second symposium of the Israeli-Palestinian Peace Symposium series. We, the organizers and speakers, see you as active participants, although we cannot offer you a microphone. Your participation begins with your listening to those of us from Israel and the Palestinian territories, and then spreads by you passing it on. We will be speaking from the heart and trying to empower you to encourage the Biden-Harris administration to get our leaders to put their negotiators back at the negotiating table. We progressives in Israel and Palestine are asking you Americans for your help. It's not America forcing its way into a battle zone. So, a year after Joel Siegel first contacted me with the idea, we're already broadcasting a second symposium. Since we announced the first symposium, a mini war and intercommunal violence within Israel have taken their tolls. These horrific actions have also spilled off into the streets of America, where hate crimes are only one result of our conflict. Time is not on our side. The fearmongers succeeded to incite the few, while there are those of us who remain dedicated to the principle that Jews and Arabs refuse to be enemies. I'm already against the next war. Any linkage between our conflict and the physical attacks against Jews or their institutions in the USA must be condemned by American progressives, just as attacks against Muslims, Arabs, and their institutions were condemned by American Jews following September 11. American Jews proudly stood guard at mosques and in the press. And still, there is reason to be optimistic. Since we started our planning a year ago, the Likudnikan governments in Israel and the USA have been replaced. That's already an achievement. But even in the past week, the King of Jordan sat with President Biden and told him of the encouragement that he received in his meeting with Prime Minister Bennett and Minister of Security Benny Gantz, and that it appears that the Palestinians and Israelis are pointing at progress. The Syrians and Jordanians say we must move forward. In the symposium series, we will not play the role of the leaders or their negotiating teams. We will be telling our own personal stories and our own reasons why we believe that peace is possible, and it's the only way. We are one-staters, two-staters, and others, all with one belief that peace is possible, and it's the only way. We warn you, we might use certain words or terms that sound inflammatory or insulting to some. I guarantee you that none of us have any such intent. We speak with love speech. We apologize if something one of us has said caused either pain or anger. Among applicable touchy words are terrorist, Zionist, apartheid, occupation, and more. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter or soldier, and vice versa. We all agree to disagree, and we'll be careful, but not necessarily perfect in sticking to our guidelines. We have taken measures to ensure allowing speakers, including Palestinians and Israelis, Jews and Arabs, Americans, women and men, in short, to represent all who are active in working for peace. We will introduce you to some of the over 150 organizations and activist groups that can consistently work for a mutual future between Jews and Arabs in Israel and the Palestinian territories. We will now go to our speakers, but I must mention before we begin that our friend Asfahan Bahalul from the ancient city of Akko had to cancel at the last moment, so she won't be speaking tonight. We're very sorry about that, and we will be absolutely sure that she gets to speak at the next symposium. So we will turn to Joel Siegel, who was the founder of the global HIV/AIDS movement inside and outside of Congress. He was the author of the bill and founder of the movement in 2000 for universal health care, also known as Medicare for All, leading to the first Medicare for All bill, as the senior legislative assistant to Representative John Conyers. Joel drafted a bill in Congress calling for a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine, and for President Obama to encourage diplomacy that was introduced by the late Representative Walter Jones of North Carolina. He has been involved at the highest levels working on peace with Israeli peace and end the occupation leaders, the Arab League, the State Department, and the PLO. He organized congressional briefings on Middle East peace. Joel's been working literally on Middle East peace for 20 years. Joel, it's yours. Unmute, Joel.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Joel Siegel, and peace is possible, and it's the only way to stabilize Israel and Palestine and the world. I am so honored to be with Rabbi Michael Lerner, who is one of the most important social justice activists of my lifetime and Jewish progressive scholars. And I would like to encourage everybody to read this book, Embracing Israel and Palestine, a strategy to heal and transform the Middle East. I saw Michael Lerner speak about 9 years ago at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C., and he said something that was very important. He was talking about his book. He said, often people say that those who want peace, that we're unrealistic. And he said, I'm proud of being unrealistic. And it made an impression on me because being unrealistic is really what it takes in order to make peace. And all the people who are on this, this Zoom, no, it's not Zoom, stream, are all leaders in their own right in Palestine and Israel. And Uri Zaki, Victor Friedman, Rafa, you're going to hear from people who are doing the work on the ground. Right now, we're in an inflection point in terms of peace between Israel and Palestine. And the need for negotiations to take place now to achieve a final status peace agreement between Israel and Palestine, something that was promised to the Palestinian people in the Oslo peace accords. Unfortunately, we're at a standstill. We're at a gridlock for there to be negotiations. In my opinion, Donald Trump nor Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted peace with the Palestinians, nor were they supporters of an independent Palestinian state. When Netanyahu was in office, he could have picked up the phone and called President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority to discuss negotiations for peace. But Netanyahu, who was a hardliner and still is, never made that call. The good news is that Netanyahu is not in office and Trump is gone. Therefore, that leaves us with an opening. We, the progressive, re-energized Middle East peace movement, to make our voice heard. There are over 150 organizations in Israel and Palestine working for peace. They have asked progressive leaders in America to help them get a foothold in Congress, the White House, and the progressive community. And that is what is going on today. Having worked with the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, and the Arab League for many years, I am 100% convinced that they want to strike a peace deal with Israel. However, for years when Netanyahu was in office, they did not have a partner in peace. Often I hear from the Jewish community that the Palestinians are not a partner in peace. I beg to differ respectfully. Having worked in Congress for 13 years and growing up in the conservative Jewish community, having Jewish family members who for decades were opposed to a Palestinian state, and someone who worships at the Chabad Jewish Orthodox temple in Charlotte, North Carolina, I have seen firsthand what I believe is a great misunderstanding about the Palestinian community. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later on in some of my remarks. In conclusion, I will say that when I worked in Congress, what troubled me deeply was when I saw hardliners in the Jewish community, I'm not going to name the organizations, who put unrelenting pressure on congressional staffers like myself and those who work in the White House under President Obama not to engage in the peace process with the Palestinians. Why? Their paradigm, which I think is based on what Paul Krugman calls intellectual confusion, was that if there was a Palestinian state, that would be the end of Israel's existence. I beg to differ. Where I'm very hopeful is that we have a new opportunity to do something great. Peace cannot be left to the politicians. It's going to have to come from the civil society and the grassroots. Sadly, the ambassador of the PLO embassy in DC was not allowed into meetings with members of Congress because they were blocked by staff. Why? Because the staff that thought if they met with the Palestinian ambassador, then they could lose their reelection because hardline Jewish and Christian organizations would run commercials, raise money, and defeat them. Things must change. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be a part of this symposium.
Now we'll hear from Rabbi Michael Lerner.
I will introduce Michael Lerner by saying that Rabbi Michael Lerner is an American political activist. He's the editor of Tikkun, a progressive Jewish interfaith magazine based in Berkeley, California, and he's the rabbi of Beit Tikkun Synagogue in Berkeley. Rabbi Michael has earned many awards and honors, including being recognized in 1995 as one of the world's top 100 visionaries. In his book, Healing Israel-Palestine, he forged a progressive middle path that is both pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. Michael even eulogized Muhammad Ali at his memorial service. And I could spend the rest of the evening or afternoon, wherever you are, telling you about Rabbi Lerner, but instead I'll let him speak. Rabbi Michael Lerner, please unmute and let us hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay,
great. So it's an honor to be with you. And I do also believe that peace is possible and that we can make it happen. I do think that there are very strong forces working against that, and both in the American Jewish community, but also in Hamas, which has been a major ally, to the right wing in Israel, by always showing up and doing what makes it possible for people to say, aha, see, it's not safe. It'll never be safe because these people want to destroy us. So that consciousness is there, but at a deeper level, and I think that this is what I can add to this conversation at this moment, because on some level, I think it's incredible chutzpah, nerve of me to even be here when there are people on the ground in Israel also in this conversation. What's this rabbi from California have to do with anything? It's real chutzpah for me to participate, but only because I've loved Moshe Chertoff for a very long time, and I've felt very connected to Joel Siegel for a long time, so here I am. But what I want to say is this. from me, in my explorations, and I spent many years in Israel and talking to Palestinians a great deal. The central issue that needs to be addressed by a progressive movement is the trauma that still shapes the consciousness of everybody, certainly in the Jewish world and in the Palestinian world. That trauma is deep, deep and real. It comes from not just the Holocaust, but 2,000 years of being treated terribly by the world that made Jews feel we have to have a state because everybody in the world disregards our suffering on the one hand. And on the other hand, the trauma of the Nakba and the incredible pain faced by hundreds of thousands of people who were forced out of their homes in the creation of the state of Israel, not to mention the many millions that have turned out to be their children and inherited that trauma. We have to look at these two peoples as traumatized and deal with them from a standpoint of how can we acknowledge to them first the suffering that they've had and acknowledge to them the fears that they have and not act as though this is simply a matter of sitting down at a table and getting the right solution. Because yes, for a very long time, we've had a very clear picture on both sides of this issue of what a final solution for this would look like, respecting both the Palestinian people and their need for self-determination and the Israeli people's need for security and a sense of safety. But the issue is, how do you get people to say that's possible? That's why I say, yes, screw realism. Don't be realistic. Go for your highest vision of what can happen in this world, because every human being actually wants a world of love, caring, kindness, and generosity, but at the same time has been so deeply indoctrinated in the vision of capitalist society that every single person looks out for themselves and doesn't care about anybody else. But that is true in behavior only because people have absorbed that teaching and come to believe that they would be looked at as foolish and self-destructive if they were to open their hearts and care for others. But that opening of heart is always available. It's always possible. And so we have to speak not simply in technocratic language about what the terms are when we get them to the table, but in a language of love and caring and kindness and generosity, a language that deeply speaks and resonates with the hunger so many people have for a different kind of world. That's what it is, from my standpoint, to be a religious Jew, to talk about that, the possibility and necessity of such a world. And from the encounters I had, my long friendship with Muhammad Ali, and then with many other Muslims, I know that same idea is there in the hearts of people who others are demeaning and saying, oh no, they would never buy this. They'll always be untrustworthy. It's not true. And we have to then be educating the people, not simply the people in Congress, because those people in Congress are scared for their jobs. And there's some reason for that. We need a movement that is not just for peace, but for a world of kindness and justice and love. And so I'll stop my chutzpah and let people speak.
Rabbi Lerner, we are so pleased to have you here with us. It's not a matter of chutzpah. We're really very happy that you could make it. But I have a question for you. Sure. After witnessing the recent mini war between Gaza and Israel and the intercommunal violence within Israel, where are the vast numbers of other rabbis pushing for peace in their congregations? That is, shouldn't leaders of the Jewish community in America make the discussion about peace and a mutual future a weekly part of the discussions in their congregations?
Absolutely, and they should, but it's a big jump from should to is, and so again we have to ask, what would make that possible? It would be great, for example, if people in Israel, Israelis, could put together a letter to be sent to as many rabbis as possible. And I would certainly be helpful in trying to get that letter distributed to other rabbis in the United States that called upon them to use the high holidays today. The high holidays in very early September as an opportunity to do tshuva, repentance, for our part in this in keeping this war going. That doesn't mean that it's all our fault. No, it is totally a mutual problem. But we have a part in it, and we have and so a letter that addressed those rabbis and said, please address the need for teshuva and a new open-heartedness towards the Palestinian people as well as towards Israelis, so that because you American Jews stand as an obstacle towards the possibility of peace when you only see one side of the story. You need to see both sides of the story and open your hearts to both sides of the story. And you know, and you can also cite, if you want, the Embracing Israel-Palestine book as something that I'd be happy to give away for free. You know, I'm not okay. I want those rabbis to read it. So if you can get that kind of a letter, I will try to get it. But get some significant rabbis in Israel to make that kind of appeal.
Excellent, excellent. I have that as a task. I've written it down, and we'll try to get that done and get it to you. Thank you very much. We're going now to go to Uri Zaki, who is the chairman of the executive board of the Meretz Party in Israel. He's also the founder and chairman of the Front for the Protection of Democracy in Israel. He's the former USA director at B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, and a former consultant at Human Rights Watch. And that list also continues. Uri, please, we'll be happy to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. I too believe that peace is possible. I do believe it's the only way, well, at least the only way that's good for both peoples and for the rest of the world and everybody that cares about this piece of land. Although, as we all know, it's not the only way that both sides execute, right? We see the way of lack of peace. First of all, thank you, Moshe and Joel and everybody for having me on this panel. It's a great honor to be speaking after Rabbi Lerner, whose work I know for years. And of course, hearing his visionary words right now made it a bit less easy for me to speak, but I will do my best in order to not to reach the same level, but to aspire to go there. I want to start by connecting to one of the themes that Rabbi Lerner talked about, and that's fear. I believe fear is a very important element in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I believe that both peoples are fearful, and rightly so. I mean, if you take each side of the conflict and speak with them, you'll hear very rational arguments why they fear of change, why they fear of letting the other side be get legitimacy for power or recognition and so on and so forth. As Rabbi Lerner mentioned, the history of the Jewish people is well integrated into the current Israeli nation and its citizens. It's kind of surprising because, for the rest of the world, we're this, strong nation with a strong army and everything. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we do is derives from fear from our own history, which makes any kid that throws a rock on a car in the occupied territories as a terrorist, or even you can see in the psyche of the Jews living here 3 generations after the Holocaust, a German soldier. That doesn't make any sense but it's part of our psychology, and you cannot get away from it. The same with the Palestinians. We see them as those violent. Not me specifically, but at the end of the day, the Israelis or some Jews in the United States as these violent people who terrorizing Israel and so on and so forth, and they see themselves also, rightly so, as victims of the Nakba, as victims of occupation, and so on and so forth. That also comes to a lack of recognition on both sides. I as a progressive Jew in Israel, I do my best to listen to as much as I can and to speak more, not just listen, but also to speak with people who hold different positions on the political spectrum here in Israel. I often speak on TV channels and other media of the Israeli right wing and sometimes populist right wing, kind of an equivalent to Fox News, etc. And I see myself as a kind of an ambassador, and I got a lot of following there. It's very interesting because I'm very blunt with my positions. And many of the arguments there are trying to say there's no Palestinian people at all. There's no Palestinian people. The Palestinians are only a reaction to the Zionist movement. They never saw themselves as people. They're part of the Arab people, and it's all an invention, a reaction to Zionism. By the way, historically it might be true, but all nations are like that, are imaginary, as we all know. As long as you feel that you're part of a nation, then you're part of a nation. We can say that about America, about Finland, about France, about Morocco, you name it. But then you speak with some of the Palestinians, and they say, hold on, Judaism or the Jewish people are not a nation. They are a religion. We have Jews here in some Arab nations. You have Jews in America. You have Jews everywhere. You guys are not a nation. You're just a religion. Why? In order to invade our land, you invented yourself as a nation. Again, that's irrelevant because once I can give very good arguments why we are a nation, we are people that deserve self-determination. The same way as I give good arguments, and I think both are solid for Palestinian self-determination. And you know what? That argument is silly because both sides see themselves as nations, as peoples who deserve self-determination. And you know what? Most of the world agrees with that. Most of the world agrees that Israel, as a Jewish homeland, is something that needs to carry on. But in order to do that, you need a Palestinian state next to it. And that would be a solution that would somehow reconcile those two positions. Now, in order to reconcile those two positions, you need, as I said before, to fight fear. And I believe, since this is a symposium with many Americans watching, I believe that many times our instinct is to attack. With the culture of social media and everything, Twitter, it's either my way or the highway. And once I hold a position, anyone that holds a position that's somewhat different, not even totally different, they're the enemy, especially if it's the enemy themselves. And I think you guys as people who care for Palestinians, for Israelis, for peace in the Holy Land, as Rabbi Lerner said, we need to act as a moderator, both in the sense of moderating political talks, diplomatic talks between Israelis and Palestinians, but also as moderating the discussion, preventing it to going to violence, either actual violence on the ground, that's the job of politicians, but also of oral violence between the two sides. Now, I know it's frustrating. I know that I get frustrated. We had last week, there was a huge debate here in Israel, not a debate, Ben and Jerry said, we won't sell ice cream in the occupied territories, in the settlements. And apart from my party in the coalition and the Arab parties in the Knesset, everybody else said, this is anti-Semitism, this is terrorism. Our president, who's a decent guy, our newly elected president, said it's terrorism, not less. I'm not sure, how effective boycotting, Israel or Iran or you name any country. Perhaps it is, perhaps it's not. This is not even boycotting Israel. It's boycotting an occupied territory. It's fulfilling your right for freedom of speech, freedom of it's basic, but it's regarded both because of fear, genuine fear, as I mentioned before. It's very easy for Jews to think that they're being treated unequally, because we have, as Rabbi Lerner said, 2,000 years of examples to that, but also manipulating, saying, every criticism, let's shut down any criticism on Israel. I think, it's okay to criticize Israel. It's especially okay for American Jews to criticize Israel, because Israel regards itself as the homeland of the Jewish people, not only its citizens. So, Rabbi Lerner, I think it's quite okay for you to speak out, and I know you do, but you don't. It's not a chutzpah at all. And I think as long as it comes, I hope it doesn't have to be like that, and I can't control everyone's feelings, and I do know that some Jews, feel that now, because of this long occupation of the territories, this long military regime over the Palestinian people, we're fed up with Israel, and because we feel family, we're more angry. But I think the job of a caring brother, either an American Jew, an American Christian, American Muslim, from all faiths, races, you name it, because somehow this piece of land is important to so many, is not to say everything that you're doing is okay, like some of the Jewish establishment is asking us to do. Like, we say amen after everything Israel does. No, that's a horrible approach for someone, for instance, who, let's say your brother is a drug addict. You don't say, go ahead, continue taking those drugs. No, you don't do that. You say, this is wrong for you. You should do something else. But on the other hand, don't beat them up. Don't slap their faces, because it doesn't help. It only creates a defensive approach, and that's true also to the other side. I think for now, I didn't go into any political details, although that's my main thing. Perhaps later on in the discussion, I'll dive some of the details on things that I think can be done, and I do think that the two-state solution is as I mentioned before, peace is the only way. Well, the two-state solution is the only way to get out of this deadlock and to create a different track that would save Israel, as I and all of us love it, the kind of the democratic Jewish homeland, and will also create a Palestinian state. But I also think that we should not be dogmatic about how to, if we'll come back to the negotiation table, what would be the nature of the connection between those two nation states. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Uri. I really appreciate your comments. I want to ask just one question, which is a simple one. I say simple with a smirk on my face. What do you think the best way to get people who don't believe that peace is possible, what's the best way to get them to listen to this kind of an argument?
Wow, that's thank you, Reverend. It's an easy question. Listen, it's not easy, but from my, after this session, I'm going to speak to a Sephardic yeshiva. Now, yeshivas are the scholaries of Jews, and this specific one is connected to the Shas party. It's a conservative right-wing party in Israel that represents the ultra-Orthodox Sephardic. Sephardic meaning they came from the Middle East countries originally. As myself, I'm half-half. My dad is from Egypt. My mom's from, her parents are from Poland. And you know, I was invited there. They know exactly what my positions are. They're usually they would go to we see in Israel, meaning, you know, you can't trust Palestinians. We shouldn't give up any land. We shouldn't do anything. You know, the fact that I was invited there and they were exposed to my positions because I do a lot of shows on mainstream Israeli media, but as before, also on the right-wing media. I speak out and I say whatever I believe in, but I do it with a respect manner. That's what they keep telling me. Keep telling me two things, because I asked them, you know, how come you keep telling me how much you adore what I'm doing and you adore my position, although you don't agree with me? I get two answers, and maybe it's maybe it'd be not so peculiar to you. The first one is because I'm a person of faith. Most of the Israeli right wing are people of faith, and while the liberal camp in Israel is mostly secular, I'm a person of faith, and therefore I get a lot of I get their ears because many of my arguments are based on my faith. And the second one is talking respectfully. That's what he tells me. You speak to us respectfully. We're not used to it. We used to be, you know, we used to tackle with each other. And you know what? I didn't even know I'm like that. I speak to any person the same way. It's not a shtick. That's who I am. I'm really, I say this in the most humble manner I can. Really, I'm not doing anything artificial. I'm being myself on those talk shows. So these, I think it can be a lesson to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Uri. Really appreciate that. And I love the fact that you have to speak sometimes from a position of religion. And as a person who speaks from religious position, it's not always an easy position to take, though there's much within our faith.
Okay.
To make such arguments at times. It's often difficult to hear such arguments from people of faith, though our faith traditions have so much that lends us to work towards peace. Now I'd love to hear from Rafa Mishmar. Rafa is a member of Women Wage Peace and Combatants for Peace, so these two great peace organizations. She's a resident of Ramallah in Palestine, and I'd love to I'd love to hear from you about what makes you believe that peace is possible and the only way.
Before you start, Rafa, I'll just add a bit of information to the introduction, and I hope you can hear me now. The Women Wage Peace Organization, to which Rafa is a member, is a grassroots movement with tens of thousands of members from the right, center, and left of the political spectrum, Jews and Arabs, religious and secular, united in the demand for a mutually binding, nonviolent agreement between Israelis and Palestinians involving women in the process in the spirit of UN Resolution 1325. She's also a leading member in Combatants for Peace, a group of Palestinians and Israelis who have taken an active part in the cycle of violence in our region, Israeli soldiers serving in the IDF and Palestinians as combatants fighting to free their country, Palestine, from the Israeli occupation. And she holds a master's degree in democracy and human rights from Birzeit University in Ramallah and lives in Ramallah in the West Bank. Rafa, thank you.
Thank you. Peace is possible for sure. This is why I am a peace activist for more than 10 years. And I'm volunteering with the two main important organizations here working for peace in Palestine and Israel. Peace for sure is possible because we still believe in it and we're still asking for it. Me and my friends and colleagues in Israel and Palestine, in West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem. People are always looking for a good future for themselves, especially as Palestinians. and a safe future for their lives as Israelis and Palestinians too. I'm a Palestinian, live in Palestine, born and raised in Nablus, north of West Bank, a city located between two mountains, very nice mountains. But this city faced a lot of military operations, and we lost many young people and beautiful young people. They were able to be peace activists and work with us more and more for a good future too. I'm right now located in Ramallah because it's more easy to access to more organizations because you need to pass the 3 checkpoints passing from Nablus to Ramallah, which is too much to handle. In case if you have appointment, you have to be like ready in 2 hours before your appointment just to pass the checkpoints and be ready. You will be on time and make sure that you will be on time because you know it's an it's a life chance to have a good job or good interview or even to do a good opportunity in your life while you are facing an Israeli occupation all the day. It's the ugly thing to live under occupation, by the way. I grew up in a secular family, and my dad always told me, if you want to help your country, tell the others how ugly is occupation and how much we need it here as Palestinians to live in a free state called Palestine. And since we voted for Abu Mazen 2009, Mahmoud Abbas, we believe this is the best chance ever for peace, a real peace agreement, and in the same time to implement Oslo Accord because we believed in it. I was a little girl that time when it was happened and signed. I remember my family, they were very happy because they believed peacetime is just started and we want to have like a normal life like any other country around us. But unfortunately, frustration was like leading all of that steps. I'm telling the people who doesn't know or ever believe that there is no Palestinian partner for peace, I'm sorry to tell you, there is Palestinian partner for peace. There is a leader. He was really interested to have peace, but unfortunately, Israeli government within its right interest, heading all the time towards right beliefs, which is never interested to have any peace agreement with the Palestinians. They always interested to building more settlements, seizing more land from the Palestinians, uprooted more Palestinians, and let the new generation live what the previous generation faced as the Nakba and Naksa and different names of frustration and oppression and occupation. I'm a girl who grew up in a Muslim society. I have my own obstacles as a girl in a patriarchal society, but still occupation is one of the main obstacles I'm facing it. While when you are like a little girl, the only picture you know it for your neighbor, the Israelis, is the Israeli soldier who's standing up there holding his gun, pointing at you while you are in a car, or you are walking, or you are doing anything just in the area which is outside your city. We have checkpoints between cities and villages, which is both Palestinians. West Bank is totally occupied. We are facing the horrible moments when any Israeli patrol attacking your house, and if you were not on the door opening it within less than 2 minutes, they could bomb your house and enter your room while you are still sleeping. This is one of the, I can say, most of the Palestinian children, they face it and lived it, which is absolutely, I don't want it anymore for my, let's say, nephews and nieces, for my friends, for my, even for my memory and my friends and the close friends' memories, because I always telling them about my best friends ever who's helping me in promoting the idea of peace is possible, sharing this belief with Israeli peace activists who are working hard in the middle of Tel Aviv, in the middle of Jerusalem, facing all of that radical, violent governments which never recognized these people as a good people. They were always attacked by the government and the police as much as Palestinians were attacked from the Israeli army. So of course, peace is possible. And we need everybody to help in that, to believe in it, working in it. Truly, I'm very happy to be in this symposium because it's the first time to see people saying things from reality, from facts, from how the people are at the Congress thinking, or the Knesset thinking, or other places, which is the most powerful positions in the world, which could lead the two leaders to do peace or to continue the war, which is both nations, as Israelis and Palestinians, are the losers in this situation. We suffered enough as Palestinians and Israelis from all of that aggressive attitudes from Netanyahu. And right now, as a Palestinian, I'm telling you, I totally believe it's the right time to put the two leaders on a table to discuss the real peace. Bennett, he should improve himself as a good Israeli, not as a good right-wing Israeli. No, he's a good Israeli. And lots of Israelis, they need this type of leader right now, because we Palestinians and Israelis who believe in peace, we need such a kind of leader who want to hear us, who want to support our work, to have a real peace implementation, not just words, not just peace conferences or even speeches. We need implementation for that. People in Jerusalem are really looking forward for have a real chance to feel as a normal citizens within the Holy Land, at the Holy City, Jerusalem. Many Palestinians all over the world, they are waiting for a good talk right now within a new administration in USA, Mr. Biden. He's a very important, like, a turn according to what we faced in the last 4 years within a Trump administration. And right now we have a good chance with Bennett, and he's still the man who always believed in peace, and he always asked for peace, as Mahmoud Abbas, which we can consider him one of the last chances for us as Palestinians to put his word about, yes, it's the time to have peace, like three of them together, Biden, Bennett, and Mahmoud Abbas, but with the support of the streets. Like, we need your support in the American street, at the Palestinian street, and Israeli street. We can't do it alone. Simply, we can't do it alone, because if the streets of America did not raise and shake the water to say, yes, it's the time. It's the best time, because people need to stop the suffering, and at the same time we should look to the world with a different point of view, because there is human rights violation is doing every day. We need to stop it. There is dreams for children. They need to have it, and after many years or few years to live in it, not just to dream it. And there is a lot of young people on the both sides. They are really looking for a good chances of work, business, and sharing the interest or even the dreams to be a normal neighbors. Yes, peace is possible, and we can be a normal neighbors, Palestinians and Israelis, within the two-state solution or any peace agreement which could implement justice and freedom for Palestinians. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. I have to also let others know that not only do most Americans not know what life is like under occupation, most Israeli Jews do not know. In fact, most Israeli Jews can successfully ignore it, and that's probably been part of the problem up until now. And speaking to what Uri said before, and also Rabbi Lerner, the fear that we were talking about, I call it a justified paranoia that we both exhibit, because when you have a country that you can actually see from one side to the other of the country in its widest point, or in Palestine where the only thing you can see is settlements all around you, there is a justified paranoia on all sides. So I thank you for letting us hear your comments about that and your experiences. And next, we will go to our next speaker is Professor Victor Friedman, who is a professor emeritus of organizational behavior at the Max Stern Jezreel Valley College in Israel, where he also founded and directed the Action Research Center for Social Justice. And much of his work is focused on bringing together young Israeli Jews and Arab Palestinians to build peace, as well as a more equal and just society. Professor Friedman, please.
Thank you, Moshe. And yes, I believe that peace is possible, but building on what Uri said, it may not be the only way, but it's really the only way to prevent a disaster for both Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs. I'm a psychologist by training, and I've been in higher education. I'm an academic, and most of my work has been with students. And I believe peace is possible because of the work that I've done with students, both Israeli Jews, Israeli Arab Palestinians, and as well as Palestinians in the occupied territories. And I just want to give a little background about higher education, because it's very interesting that in Israel, young Jews, now first of all, you should know that in Israel, 20% of the population has been, since the creation of the state, are Palestinian Arabs who remained after 1948, and it's still today. And these are citizens, as opposed to Rafa, for example, who's living on the West Bank and is not an Israeli citizen and suffers from occupation. But in Israeli, higher education is the place where most young Jews and young Arab Palestinians meet for the first time, because they study in separate school systems. And that way it represents a real opportunity, but also a microcosm of the conflict. And so the work that we've been doing for over 30 years has been trying to create this kind of dialogue to bring people together, as Moshe said, to both build peace and a more just and equal society. I'd like to talk today a little bit about my Jewish students in particular and the way they see things. And I'm going to do this by telling a story. And it's a story about a field trip that I took with the students. Actually, there were both Jewish and Arab students on this field trip, but the Jewish students, this really focuses on them. And the field trip was to a town, an Arab town called Barta'a. Now, Barta'a sits right on what is called the Green Line. If you don't know what the Green Line is, well, it was the ceasefire line in 1948, which divided between the Israeli forces and the Arab forces, and then it became the de facto border. It's not actually the border, but it's the de facto border between Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. And then in 1967, after Israel conquered the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan Heights, it became the Green Line became the division between Israel and what we call the occupied territories. So Barta'a sits right on the Green Line. And before 1967, there was a fence that went right down the middle of this village. And if you lived on one side, you couldn't visit your family on the other side. Now, one of the interesting things today in Israel is that you will often hear people say that the Green Line has been erased, that there's no longer a Green Line, that it's not there anymore, that it's irrelevant. And the people who say that primarily say that because for many years, the Israeli government, but particularly the settler movement, has made a great effort to remove any physical remnants of the actual Green Line, but even more so, trying to create a kind of state of mind that Israel naturally is just one continuum from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the Jordan River in the east, and it's just all one, it's all ours, basically. That's the idea that's trying to be created when you say we've erased the Green Line, and that no border could ever be put there again. And that essentially is a way of saying that a two-state solution is not possible. So going back to our field trip to Barta'a. So I was with my students, and as I said, there had been the Green Line goes right through the center of town. There had been a boundary, but after the '67 war, that boundary was taken away. In fact, if you walk through Barta'a today, you can't see anything. It's just one town. And I was walking through the town with my students, and we were walking out of the marketplace, and just at the point where the Green Line used to be, and as I said, you can't see any sign of it. And I stopped and I told my students, I said, we've just crossed the Green Line from Israel into the occupied territories or the West Bank or Judah Samaria, however you want to call it. Well, I looked at my students and they all turned white. I mean, fear, panic. And I swear, one of them turned to me and said, can we go back to Israel now? Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that the Green Line has not been erased. And I think I can say that for most Israeli Jews, the Green Line still exists, at least in their minds. And that's good news. But it's also bad news. This story really is a story about good news and bad news. The good news is that, in fact, the Green Line still exists in the minds of most Israelis, young and old. And that also explains why, if you look at the polls today, even today, when people seem to be so pessimistic, the vast majority of Israelis, or maybe not the vast majority, but the majority of Israelis will say that they still believe that the two-state solution is the optimal solution. Because in their minds, there is a border, and on one side there's Israel, and the other side there's something else, which is Palestine. But the story is also a story with bad news. And the bad news is the students' reaction of fear. And this has been a theme throughout this symposium. It's very interesting. I hadn't coordinated with others, but Rabbi Lerner spoke about it, and Uri spoke about it. And I'm talking about now the fear on the Jewish side. And later I could also talk about my Palestinian Arab students. But it is this fear that, and it's a fear which really is a kind of symbolic fear. I mean, the very word Palestinian will invoke fear among Israelis. And it's this fear that makes it difficult for Israelis to do what has to be done in order to make the two-state solution work, even though they may be in favor of it. And this fear, which has been very skillfully nurtured and manipulated by the settler movement, by the right wing, and particularly by Netanyahu in his time in office. This fear is what leads many Israelis to see peace as some kind of impossible dream, something very naive, but not realistic. And so the real issue, and we heard it throughout the symposium, and one of the things that I've worked on with my students in particular, is this fear. How do you deal with this fear? How do you overcome this fear? Where does it come from in the first place? But once you figure that out, how do you overcome it? And that's something we'll have to work on if we want to arrive at at a peace settlement, whether it's two-state or one-state. I just add that the other side of that fear is that peace isn't just separation. That's an important thing for everyone to remember. Peace isn't just separation. I mean, some Israelis would like to see that we're separated, we never see Palestinians again. But that's not going to happen. Peace is going to mean that we have to have our own, something of our own, but at the same time, each side, but we have to always live together. It's too small of a country for us to think of any separate situation. So we have to overcome that fear. That's some of the work I've done. I can talk about it a little bit later, and I can also talk about our Palestinian side if there's interest in that.
Victor, thank you so much for your words and your reflections, particularly bringing in the thoughts of students from the classroom as well. I think it's wonderful. One question I did have of you is about that issue of fear. What do you think is the basis of this fear? Is this fear synthetic? Is it intentionally crafted by some? And how do we begin to work against that fear?
Well, if I talk about the Jewish side, Israel, of course, Rabbi Lerner spoke about the fear from ancient, it was sort of part of our DNA. But I think that the fear that I'm talking about actually can be pinpointed to a very specific set of events. I think that the real turning point for the majority of Israelis, and particularly my students, was the Second Intifada. My students, if I look back for 30 years, my students were, the students I have now were 5 years old at that time, maybe even younger. But it was a formative experience for them. I think prior to that time, there was a great, there was more widespread sympathy for Palestinians in Israel. If you take an example, when there was the massacre at Sabra and Shatila, there was a demonstration in Israel. 500,000 people took to the streets in outrage that we could allow this to happen, right? But during the Second Intifada, that was a time when I think most Israelis, by the way, most Jews and Arabs who live in Israel, experienced existential fear, even more so than in the Yom Kippur War, for example, when there was a real chance of being overrun, but most people didn't know what was going on. In the Second Intifada, you were afraid to send your children put them on a bus. You didn't know if you left the home in the daytime you were going to come back. All kinds of things happened. And so people who grew up during that time, I think, are very easily influenced by that word terror, which is used again and again, and it's so misused. We just heard it now. I don't know if you know about this latest issue that Ben and Jerry's has now said that they will not sell their ice cream in the occupied territories. And our president of our country said, well, that's economic terror. That's a form of economic terror. And, I mean, that's so misusing the word terror. And but I mean, the fear is real in that regard. But what's really interesting, I would just add that when my students meet, Jewish and Arab students meet, they know that the person sitting next to them is not going to hurt them, is not their enemy. And yet they still feel this fear deep down. And that's one of the things that really keeps them apart. And that's one of the things that we deal with. And again, I'm talking only about the Israeli side. The Arabs and the Palestinians have a whole experience which Rafa has talked about a bit. And I'm a little bit wary about speaking for that side.
Very good. Thank you very much, Victor. Excellent. We're going to take the opportunity. We have some 20 minutes left. We're going to take the opportunity to ask a general question to everybody. I understand that Uri has to leave in a couple of minutes, so let's let Uri answer first. The question to everyone is, the question is, what has your community, your own community, done in the past or is still doing now to create barriers to peace negotiations? Uri, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, first of all, thank you for letting me, as I said before, I need to speak at that yeshiva, and I thought it's closer, but I checked Waze, and it's almost an hour drive now, I guess, because of traffic. So that's why I have to leave a bit earlier than I thought. Listen, at the end of the day, my side, so-called, our country, Israel is holding the cards at the end of the day. I mean, the bottom line is that, I believe that this conflict started way before 48. Of course, it crystallized in 48, but I do believe that the results of 48, meaning a Jewish homeland, Jewish nation, democratic Jewish nation is something that's important, and I'm proud of it. But what we do since June 67 is horrible. I mean, as a democracy, to hold millions of Palestinians under military control, under military regime, while at the same time colonizing the same territory with our own citizens, and they take their bag of rights to that territory. And again, in the same territory, you have people who do not enjoy the basic right of electing their own government, and they lack citizenship, and so on and so forth. So that's what we do. We continue the occupation, and the occupation is horrible. And of course, there are many justifications and security and everything. I don't, just a couple of months ago, even less, we had rockets falling here in Tel Aviv. It's not, we didn't imagine this, but that doesn't justify. I think it's the continuation of occupation is against the Israeli national interest. Of course, it's against the Palestinian national interest, but it's against the Israeli national interest. It's immoral, it's undemocratic, and it's not Jewish, I believe. I think the Jewish history tells us to respect other people's rights and other people and minorities' rights, and so on and so forth. So I believe that that we are addicted to occupation, and we need to stop it, and we need to start political negotiations. And I think the only path for democratic Jewish homeland goes through a Palestinian state, by Palestine being established next to Israel. It's not an easy thing. It's not easy for the Palestinians, by the way, because that means giving up on a lot of their historical rights, the way they see it, and the way, and they have good claims as much as we have good claims. But in order to make peace, you need to compromise, and we need to start compromising.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We're going to continue through the group and let everyone answer this question, but I ask that we try to keep it brief because we even have some questions from viewers. Rabbi Lerner, please, would you address that question of what you think that our community, possibly your community in Northern California, are doing to raise barriers against having the groups sit down at negotiations? Please, yeah, go ahead. I think you have to unmute, Rabbi. You have a button at the bottom of mute. You have to click that, and then you should be able to go.
Yes. Well, if you're talking about Beit Tikkun, my synagogue, we are very clearly on the side of peace and social justice for everyone. We have a slight difference in strategy that we in Tikkun magazine have been putting forward, which is that instead of calling for a two-state solution, we're calling for one person, one vote for everyone who lives under Israeli control. Now, it's not that we think that that's going to be easier to win, but we think it may touch people in Israel in a different way than the demand for a two-state solution, because it connects to previous parts of Jewish history, and particularly in the past 100 years, in which we were seeking one person, one vote for our neighbors, our friends, and so forth. Not that I think we'll win that, but I think that might, if that gets enough support, the right wing in Israel might say, we better give them a state because we don't want them to have one person, one vote in this country. But it looks like the world is building so much support, even amongst some of our allies here, that we better move towards creating a state. I think that the issue is not that we don't have a lot of people in this country who would support the reconciliation, but that people are passive about it. And particularly progressives in this country think of it, are very critical of what Israel's doing, but it's about 10th in their list of priorities. To move it up into a higher level of priorities, they need to feel called upon by Israelis to be saying, you have to speak out. We need you. And that's why I previously suggested a letter to rabbis, but I could also suggest a letter to activists in this country to understand that the Israeli progressive voices are calling upon them to put this on a higher priority in the struggles with progressives in the Congress and in the Democratic Party.
Absolutely. Very good. Thank you very much. I have to also mention again that we apologize that on the agenda was also my friend Asfahan Bahalul, who canceled at the last minute. And I hope it's for good reasons, but we apologize that she couldn't take part tonight. So let's continue with answers. Victor, would you like to answer this, please? The question about what barriers your own community has been putting up.
Well, if we're talking about community, I mean, I'll talk about Israel, and I'll just briefly answer it. And I think it's connected to what is also a little bit said before, that I mean, we have become heartless to the experience of Palestinians, and I think most Israelis, as I would say, since the Second Intifada, do not want to see or hear much about the Palestinians, really, and that's a tremendous barrier to peace negotiations or to bringing the peace. And the physical, that's also seen physically. That, for instance, in the West Bank, you have a whole system so that you can actually drive around without ever having to go into or see an Arab village, for example. The idea of having to actually create separation. And I think this separation, which has been fostered and strengthened by the Israeli government, just creates a great deal of apathy among people. They say, as long as you just keep things safe, do what you want, and and we don't care. And that, I think that's a tremendous barrier to peace. It needs to be worked, but it can be worked on.
Great, thank you, Rafa. The question to everyone is, what has your community in the past, or is your community, your specific community, doing still to raise barriers that prevent us from getting into negotiations again? Please, if you would answer that. Everyone is answering from their own community. Rafa, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Good.
Yes, truly, I want to say like a few points. One of it, it's according to Rabbi Lerner, I hope this scenario could work, but I don't think it's working anymore. One vote, because there is nothing called, let's say, a united West Bank, because right now we are living in ghettos. It's like we are more surrounded and we are more in cantons. So the issue of having two-state solution, it becomes like one of the fairy tales stories. You can say it to next generation in a way or another. I can say the option of how to implement peace is sometimes make you feel like life is difficult and the implementation is difficult too. But that doesn't mean you can't find a solution, because right now you can use the social media more and more, and you can connect to more people. So in this case, no matter are the barriers you can have a chances to meet more people and tell more about what's really happening, and at the same time to have more voices towards your rights as a let's say Palestinian freedom for people, for lives, for dreams, for even a good life. The issue of being under occupation, it touches you in every daily basic things. Like we have a real problem with water, for example, electricity. We buy it from Israel, and they can easily stop providing us the water and electricity, which is a serious problem here. The internet itself, like right now, if while I'm speaking to you, if there is any drone or any Israeli Air Force in the sky, I can't be online with you, because that's really interrupting the 3G or 4G. Of course, which is we suffered more than 10 years to have the 3G as a Palestinian services bought from Israel too. So barriers are always existed, but that doesn't mean we can't work against it, or we can't break it. We can do more towards civil rights, towards a good life for both sides. Simply, there is a plenty of a good voices in Israel. They need a really chance to be heard. Even there was, unfortunately, the stereotyping of all Palestinians are terrorists. They don't want to have a independent state. They want to have a kind of Iran style, which is not true, of course, because we have plenty of businesses happened between Palestinian businessmen and Israeli businessmen, Jewish Israeli businessmen. And we have plenty of chances in farming fields. We have plenty of chances in factory fields, so and industry field, light industry for sure. So we can do a lot. What we need exactly is to have more chances to improve that kind of work, and let's say recruit more people to believe in we should finish this drama, which is like it's been from a long time, and we should find a solution.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Joel, and I have the possibility of giving you the same question, or if you would prefer, we have a question from a viewer. Which would you prefer?
I like to answer the same question, but I would like to, at some point, have the question from the audience. Just real briefly, time is short. Incredible panelists, by the way. Everyone, great presenters. I think the biggest barrier to peace between Israel and Palestine is what I call the great misunderstanding. Hanan Asarari, in her autobiography, used a term called linkages, that in the Jewish community, the act of one person who is Palestinian is then linked to all Palestinians. We have to reject this. It'd be the equivalent of saying the act of one Israeli terrorist who did something against a Palestinian, took their life, bulldozed their property, whatever, then is translated as all Israelis are that way. No, that's not how human beings are. The progressive wing of the Jewish community whispers for the need for an end to the occupation, which I am totally opposed to, whispers about the need for peace, but thank God for J Street, and thank God for Tikkun, and thank God for rabbis from Middle East peace. We have to be a much more robust movement. We need more political power. We need to be in the national media more. I rarely see a progressive Jewish person on MSNBC or CNN, and I've been very blessed to have actually produced some MSNBC shows on Israel-Palestine on a regular basis, call for an end to the occupation and for peace. AIPAC has too much power over the Congress, over the president. They are feared like a great white shark attack. There has to be a counterbalance to AIPAC and NORPAC. If we don't do that, I don't think much will change. Thanks.
Sure. I hope that our viewers have been noticing in nuance here and there of many times that almost, or not almost, all of the speakers have said, well, that's not true. You should understand that when people say that, they've just debunked a myth. And these are dangerous myths. And you should understand that when every time someone says, that's not true, this isn't CBS talking, it's not Israeli broadcasting. These are Israelis and Palestinians on the ground and telling you that's not true. And you should also, one more I'm just going to mention before I pop in that question from the viewers, is the idea that all American Jews support the Israeli policies that have been the rule of thumb for the last 12 years. That also wasn't true. In the exit polls of the November elections, American Jews, 72% said that they want the United States to be more critical of the Israeli government and its policies. They want Israel to be willing to make difficult, the word has escaped me, to make concessions, difficult concessions to achieve a peace settlement. So there are all sorts of myths that we're really debunking along the way. The question from our viewers is, what must Americans do about the military-industrial complex and consciousness that pervades in the arrogance of Israeli soldiers, the courts, and the government? Joel, we'll let you take first crack at this. Unmute, Joel. Unmute, please. It's okay.
Sorry about that. The question that I would ask respectfully and thank you for asking that question, is what is the role of our military-industrial complex and how does that impact Israeli soldiers? I would say that the allocation to Israel of $7 billion, I think it's $7 billion a year, really has more to do with the U.S. Congress than it does the military-industrial complex. Does the military-industrial complex have an impact in Congress? Yes. But I tell you what has more impact on Congress are constituents. If constituents call their member of Congress and speak to the staffers that are in charge of Israel and Palestine and foreign policy, and we're going to introduce a sense of the House resolution very, very soon that calls on Biden to engage in diplomacy. The first time I worked on that resolution for the late, great Walter Jones, AIPAC, after we introduced the resolution, called Walter Jones, who's a Republican from North Carolina, called his office in D.C. and in North Carolina, demanding to rescind the resolution. Why? Because AIPAC, at least this particular AIPAC, not the AIPAC in the 70s and the 80s, they were much more liberal, much more progressive, is against the two-state solution. It's very clear. It was very clear to me that they're against the two-state solution. Now, are there people in the grassroots of AIPAC, who believe in a two-state solution? Maybe if you sit down and talk with them, if we do not have a dialogue, and it's got to be based on empathy, compassion, love, no finger pointing, no screaming, I think we have to focus more, not on the military-industrial complex, but on the right-wing hardliners in the Jewish community and the Christian community, who, in my opinion, scare Congress and the White House so much that they will not engage or prioritize Israeli-Palestinian peace. They will do it if they see in the media, if they see in the grassroots, if they're getting letters from their constituents. Please engage. They're more likely to do so. I think the Progressive Caucus is going to be key to meet with Biden and say this is a priority of our constituents.
Excellent. Rabbi Lerner, would you like to address that question about what can we do about the military-industrial complex and how it affects Israeli soldiers and the courts and the government?
Well, this is something that I believe would be has to be taken up in Israel. But many years ago, I and Zalman Schachter Shalomi, one of my inspirers and teachers in my path to get smicha, get ordination, approached the Israeli army leadership and asked if we could automatically do a service of cleansing for anybody who had been in the army when they were coming out of the army, to help them recognize that the consciousness that they developed in the army should not be carried into the rest of their lives. So we wanted them to have an immersion in water and a ceremony to separate the consciousness of war maker from the consciousness of what we needed in Israel on a day-to-day basis after you've served your time. Well, the leadership of the army did not agree, did not let us do it. I think it would be great if a group of religious leaders in Israel who understand the danger of carrying on that consciousness once you've been in the army. It's hard when you're in that army situation to develop an alternative consciousness. But I wish that it would be possible for those who are in the organization of fighters for peace to perhaps initiate a process of inviting people to go through a mikvah, an immersion in water, and a ceremony to avoid bringing that consciousness into daily life.
Excellent. Thank you. I know of what you're speaking because I was also attacked physically by 2 Israeli soldiers who were home on leave for handing out flowers. We handed out 500 flowers for tolerance and against racism at the local junction. And later on, we found out that these are guys who've they've served in the territories, and you come home from that, and it's hard to take that out of the human. So I totally understand what you're saying. Rafa, would you like to address that question? Rafa, please address that question, if you will. Yes, the question.
Okay. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear you very well, but
Shall I repeat the question?
answer. I can answer in a way.
Well, who knows? Maybe an Israeli drone. Hard to tell. Hard to tell. Victor, will you take that question in the meantime then, please?
Well, the question is what the Americans can do, and I really don't know. I mean, I think what Joel said was probably the right thing, was probably makes the most sense to me. But I would say that the question implies something which I think is also true. And it's why peace is the only way, because this conflict is turning Israel into a terribly militaristic society. I remember about 20 years ago or fewer, I was arguing with one of my nephews who was saying Israel's a militaristic society. I said, no, it's not. We fight only because we have to. But I've, over the past few years, seen this, and you described it, what happens to young people. They go into the army, and this is what happens to them. And when they come out, I mean, I talk to them as students later on, and that's, and you know, none of them ever will say either that they're racist or that they're brutal or that they're, what it says here, arrogant. Obviously, they don't say that. But, you know, I don't want to make Israelis, this is part of the problem. I don't want to make us into victims, and certainly the soldiers are not the victims. Certainly not. But, you know, when you talk to these soldiers, they will tell you how afraid they feel when they are on duty in the territories, right? They'll tell you that. And it's something you have to listen to. It's something you have to deal with. You have to deal with those kinds of feelings. The larger question about what the Americans can do about the Israeli industrial complex in Israel, I'm not sure.
I can answer.
Please,
the
Rafa.
question. Yes, okay. About truly the military industry, unfortunately, we have the point that Israel sometimes develops its military industry and they use it on the Palestinians, especially during their wars against Gaza, when they attack Gaza. And after that, they become like it's a good industry for the market. And it's happened many times for the Merkava or the rocket dome or the phosphorium squads or many other really kind of guns and the bullets and military materials Israel work in it, and they use it on the Palestinians, and they find a good market after that. I'm asking the American street and the American, let's say, policymakers to stop or to, let's say, to reduce all of that military support for Israel, because Israel, the real need for its people is the ability to live within a good relationship with the neighbors, not to provide Israel within more military. Lately, Netanyahu, he was like destroyed the best relationship between Israel and Jordan with all of his ego, just to keep his mind in Jerusalem and uprooted people from Sheikh Jarrah and taking more houses for the benefit of the Jewish settlers, right wing for sure. And he did not even, let's say, respected all of that years of good peace between Israel and Jordan within all of that military cooperation and security cooperation. Israel lately needs more advices to do a good human relationship with the neighbors and with the Palestinians themselves, because the Palestinians who even live inside Israel themselves, they were like neglected in the recent years, and this is why they were like on the streets forbidding all of that kind of racism against them. And there was that type of policy which is supporting the Jewish radicals to let's say to attack the mixed Palestinian or the mixed villages and towns in Israel itself. So what we need to do right now, military, we should like really avoid using it, because it goes to special pockets for a special businessmen during in the two countries, simply in Israel and USA. I want to say something about the program that we have it in Combatants for Peace, that we have a good program which is meeting by house meetings. We meet young Israelis before. We used to meet after they serve at the military. Right now, we are able from few months to meet before they serve at the military. And when you meet these people, they are like presenting the what type of methodology their families give them. Like one of them, they consider it's one of the best dreams ever to be a hero by serving your country. And he doesn't know that he's serving in occupied territory, because this is never mentioned in his family or in the neighborhood or even at the synagogue or any place he goes to. And some of them, when we show them the pictures of the checkpoints, how does the soldiers checking bag of a little student, a girl or a boy in Hebron, opening their lunchbox, they become like shocked, because wow, they always say, do we do that? We have to do that? Do I need to serve in occupied a little boy or a little girl, Israelis who have to go to the army. And we have a few of them who refused to serve at the military, and they were like doing the best ways to avoid that services, because they don't want to hurt anyone, or even they don't want to hurt themselves, because it's not easy to be a militant surrounded with civilians, and you want to keep like the eye of fear between you and them. And there is no human relationship in this case. Like, you can't really be a nice person or smiling to a person who's holding a gun pointing at you. A bullet could be released any moment. So one of the changes happened, for example, among the activists, especially at the Palestinian side, that we started to see this young soldiers as little kids, and that's a big turning point in my opinion, and the Palestinian community who believes in peace, that these are really little kids. Most of them, they were misled by the story of being a hero, serving your country. And they never even asked themselves, serving my country outside Tel Aviv, outside Israel, why I should serve my country at a checkpoint between a village called Hawara and another village called Awarta, for example. So all of this information, when we are providing them for these young people, we feel like there is a good response from them by letting them questioning the type of let's say information they received it from the family, from the school, from the circles around them, because unfortunately many of the stereotypes in the mind of young Israelis who involved to military, it becomes more about holding a gun, being a hero, taking good pictures, and even if you are humiliating another human person, no matter what is his name or his color is, or his religion is, or where he is from. So I hope the market of military will break down soon. I hope so.
We agree, and we thank you for your words. Viewers, I just want you to remain with us for another few minutes. We're going to have to close our transmission in a short while. And in the meantime, I wanted to address a couple of points. First of all, Rafa spoke about mixed cities. And in the city next door to my kibbutz in the north, in the Western Galilee, is called Akko. It's a city of 4,000 years. And there was horrific violence here in the period of the mini war in Gaza. There was a lynch attempt against a Jew, and then there was also a lynch attempt against a Palestinian Arab. And this week, in other words, in another 2 nights, there are 2 organizations that have put together a meeting to try to find out how we can prevent this from happening in the future, Jews and Arabs. So there is hope, and there's people on the ground that are working on this difficultly, with real fervor. And I think you should know that neither Jews nor Arabs are going to be leaving. And in my opinion, and I think Michael said something to the same effect, is that if you want to be truly and fully pro-Israeli, you must also be pro-Palestinian.
Amen.
Neither are leaving. If one side wins and the other side loses, both sides lose.
Amen.
There cannot be a winner in this except when both sides win. That should be the goal of negotiations. And we're not going to tell them exactly what those terms should be, but they must all agree on this is as much as we can give up, and we must now make progress. So if we all understand that, it's time to cut to the chase, and let's start making those those negotiations happen. And we want you to have the tool to understand, if you are not a progressive, understand that when you speak to people who are not in the same frame of mind that we are, that, and they're afraid to necessarily criticize Israel. We in Israel criticize the United States and the Trump administration and its policies. That didn't make us anti-American. And criticizing Israel, including my government where my friends are ministers, is not necessarily being anti-Israel, and it's definitely not being anti-Semitic. You have a right, anyone in the world has a right to criticize any other government. We should all be standing up for civil rights and human rights everywhere. So let's make sure that we sort of engage with our friends and our families and let them know we not only are okay with your addressing these things and making criticism and trying to put Israel back on track. We need you to do that. We need also progressive Americans to support progressive Palestinians and progressive Israelis so that we can show that we have the upper hand in this.
Yes.
That's pretty much what I would like to end with, and just remind you that we would be thrilled to have you all be with us in our third symposium, which will be an all-woman symposium, hopefully at the end of August. Joel, would you like to add something before we end?
Yeah, just, I heard Rafa, and the question I would ask those who are listening to us, why is there an occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem? It doesn't keep Israel, quote unquote, safer, makes them less safe. The Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government, they do joint security with each other. And I know this because one of my colleagues at the PLO embassy, his father was the general in charge. Why would you occupy East Jerusalem and the West Bank when they're providing you with security? And then lastly, many Israeli generals thought the occupation was a horrible idea at the beginning. It doesn't work. It is not necessary. It's expensive. There wouldn't be soldiers from the idea of having to risk their lives to go there, nor would there be children who live in fear of Israeli soldiers with tanks. It's the occupation, stupid, not any of you. We have to end it. We cannot end it unless everyone who's listening to us, everyone who's involved, realizes that is the reason for this conflict. The occupation has to end. It is immoral, it is evil, and it is not necessary. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank all of you, our viewers, as participants in this evening. I hope that it was both enjoyable, entertaining, and also instructional. I hope you got something, you learned something from it. I know I have. I want to thank Rodney Sadler for his being so kind and wonderful in his words, and also in allowing us to have this production, and also thank his production team. I want to thank Joel Siegel, Rabbi Michael Lerner, Uri Zaki, Rafa Mishmar, and Professor Victor Friedman. And with that, we will say shalom, salam, peace to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.